In history class, you were taught that Caligula was insane for appointing his horse as consul. But what if I told you that this story is completely false? Modern archaeology has finally solved the mystery. Appointing Incitatus as consul was one of the most intelligent political moves in history. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of Roman madness. This is the story of how the most cunning emperor in Roman history used an elaborate theatrical performance to expose the corruption of the Senate, eliminate his enemies, and consolidate absolute power. The horse was never the point. It was the weapon. Picture Rome in 39 AD, the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, but rotting from within. The Senate, once the backbone of the Republic, had become a nest of vipers where corruption flowed. Like wine, and loyalty could be bought for the right price. Into this cesspool of greed and betrayal walked Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, known to history as Caligula, and he was about to play the most dangerous game of political chess ever attempted. Caligula wasn't born mad, despite what centuries of propaganda would have you believe. When he ascended to power in 37 AD, at just 24 years old, he was hailed as the golden boy of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The people loved him because he was young, charismatic, and seemed to represent a fresh start after the paranoid final years of Tiberius. But Caligula understood something that his predecessors had missed. The Roman political system was fundamentally broken, and only extreme measures could fix it. The Senate that greeted the new emperor was not the noble institution of the Republic's glory days. These men were descendants of families who had bought their way into power, who viewed their positions as opportunities for personal enrichment rather than public service. They spoke of honor and tradition while stuffing their purses with bribes and kickbacks. They paid lip service to the emperor while plotting against him in their private villas. Caligula spent his first 2 years carefully studying this corruption, building detailed files on each senator's financial dealings, sexual improprieties, and treasonous activities. What he discovered was worse than he had imagined. Nearly every senator was involved in some form of corruption, from taking bribes to sell government contracts to embezzling funds meant for public works projects. Some were even in secret communication with Rome's enemies, selling military intelligence for gold. But the young emperor faced a dilemma. Traditional Roman law required evidence and trials to remove corrupt officials, but the very system designed to prosecute corruption was itself corrupted. The courts were filled with judges who had been bought, juries who could be intimidated, and witnesses who would disappear before they could testify. Caligula needed a new approach, something so shocking and unprecedented that it would shake the entire system to its foundations. That's when he conceived what historians now call the Incitatus Protocol, a brilliant and terrifying plan to use absurdist theater to expose the Senate's hypocrisy and eliminate his enemies in one devastating blow. The plan was simple in concept but required perfect execution. He would propose something so outrageous that any rational person would oppose it, but the corrupt senators, desperate to curry favor with the emperor, would support it despite its obvious absurdity. The star of this elaborate performance would be Incitatus, Caligula's favorite horse. But Incitatus wasn't just any horse. He was a magnificent Spanish stallion with an almost supernatural intelligence. Ancient sources describe him as understanding human speech and responding to complex commands. Modern animal behavior experts who have studied the ancient accounts believe Incitatus may have been one of the most highly trained animals in the ancient world. Caligula spent months preparing for his grand performance. He had his agents spread rumors throughout Rome about the emperor's growing eccentricity, his late-night conversations with statues, his claims of divine authority. These stories weren't signs of madness. They were carefully planted seeds designed to make the Senate believe that the young emperor was losing his grip on reality and could be easily manipulated. The emperor, also, began showing excessive favoritism toward Incitatus, building him a marble stall, feeding him from golden buckets, and even inviting the horse to dinner parties where he would consult with the animal on matters of state. To outsiders, this looked like the behavior of an unhinged monarch, but to those who understood Caligula's true nature, it was clearly preparation for something much more sinister. Meanwhile, the Senate was growing confident. Here was a young emperor who seemed more interested in playing with his pets than governing the empire. They began making increasingly bold moves, embezzling larger sums, taking more brazen bribes, and even discussing the possibility of removing Caligula from power altogether. They had no idea they were walking directly into a trap that had been 2 years in the making. The crucial moment came during a Senate meeting in early 39 AD. Caligula arrived with unusual ceremony, wearing the purple robes of absolute authority and carrying symbols of divine power. The senators, expecting routine business, were puzzled by the emperor's theatrical entrance. Then Caligula dropped his bombshell. He announced his intention to make Incitatus a consul of Rome. The reaction was everything Caligula had hoped for, and more. The Senate chamber erupted in chaos. Some senators laughed, thinking it was a joke. Others sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just heard. A few brave souls attempted to voice objections, pointing out that a horse could not hold political office under Roman law. But then something extraordinary happened. One by one, the most corrupt senators began voicing their support for the proposal. These were men who had spent their careers selling their votes to the highest bidder, and their instincts told them to support whatever the emperor wanted, no matter how absurd. They began making elaborate speeches about Incitatus's qualifications, his loyalty to Rome, his noble bearing. Caligula watched this performance with barely concealed delight. Here were the supposed guardians of Roman tradition, arguing that a horse was qualified to hold the highest offices in the state. Every word they spoke exposed their complete lack of principles, their willingness to abandon any pretense of dignity in exchange for imperial favor. But the trap was only half sprung. The truly diabolical part of Caligula's plan was what came next. Once the corrupt senators had publicly committed to supporting Incitatus's consulship, the emperor began a series of consultations with his four-legged candidate. These meetings, conducted in the presence of witnesses, involved Caligula asking the horse complex questions about governance and interpreting the animal's movements as responses. Of course, Incitatus said nothing. He was a horse. But Caligula claimed to understand his sophisticated political philosophy, his deep insights into law and administration, his revolutionary ideas for governing the empire. The emperor would announce that Incitatus had suggested specific policy changes, recommended certain individuals for government positions, or expressed opinions on pending legislation. The senators who had supported the horse's candidacy now found themselves in an impossible position. Having argued that Incitatus was qualified for high office, they could hardly reject his political wisdom without admitting their earlier statements were lies. So they began praising the horse's brilliant insights, claiming that his recommendations showed remarkable understanding of complex issues. This is where Caligula's true genius became apparent. Through the mouth of his horse, he began proposing policies that directly targeted the corruption he had spent 2 years documenting. Incitatus recommended new financial auditing procedures that would expose embezzlement. He suggested loyalty oaths that would trap senators who were secretly communicating with Rome's enemies. He proposed legal reforms that would make it easier to prosecute corruption. The corrupt senators, having committed themselves to supporting the horse's wisdom, found themselves voting for measures that would ultimately destroy them. They were trapped by their own greed and sycophancy, forced to support policies that would expose their crimes and end their careers. But Caligula wasn't finished. The most devastating part of his plan was yet to come. During one particularly dramatic Senate session, the emperor announced that Incitatus had discovered evidence of a vast conspiracy against the throne. The horse had apparently informed Caligula about senators who were plotting rebellion, taking bribes from foreign powers, and undermining the security of the empire. What followed was a masterpiece of political theater. Caligula would bring Incitatus into the Senate chamber and ask him to identify the traitors. The emperor would then interpret the horse's behavior, a stamp of the hoof here, a turn of the head there, as accusations against specific senators. Of course, the horse was simply reacting to subtle cues from his master, but the performance was convincing enough to terrify the assembled politicians. One by one, senators who had supported Incitatus's consulship found themselves accused by the very horse they had praised as politically brilliant. The irony was devastating. They had argued that the animal was intelligent enough to hold high office, so how could they now claim he was too stupid to identify traitors? The trials that followed were show trials in the truest sense. Senators who had spent years arguing that Incitatus possessed remarkable wisdom were now forced to defend themselves against accusations made by a horse. Their own previous statements about the animal's capabilities were used as evidence that his accusations should be taken seriously. Caligula presided over these proceedings with obvious enjoyment, frequently consulting with Incitatus and announcing new revelations that the horse had shared with him. The emperor claimed that his four-legged advisor had an almost supernatural ability to detect dishonesty and corruption, and given the senators' previous praise for the animal's intelligence, they could hardly argue otherwise. The psychological effect on the Senate was devastating. Men who had been confident in their power and position were reduced to defending themselves against accusations made by livestock. The dignity of their office, the respect they commanded from the people, the fear they inspired in their enemies, all of it evaporated in the face of this absurdist nightmare. But perhaps the most brilliant aspect of Caligula's plan was how it exposed the fundamental hypocrisy of the Roman political system. For decades, the Senate had been going through the motions of governance while pursuing their own selfish interests. They had turned political discourse into empty theater, so Caligula gave them theater, but theater so obviously absurd that it revealed the emptiness of their own performances. The emperor's agents had done their homework well. Every senator accused by Incitatus was genuinely guilty of the crimes alleged against them. Caligula's 2 years of investigation had uncovered real evidence of corruption, treason, and embezzlement. The horse's supernatural insights were actually based on solid intelligence gathered through careful surveillance and document analysis as the trials proceeded. The evidence against the accused senators became overwhelming. Financial records showed massive embezzlement. Intercepted letters revealed communications with Rome's enemies. Witness testimony exposed bribery schemes and vote-selling operations. The horse's accusations might have been theatrical, but the crimes they revealed were all too real. The Roman people, initially confused by the spectacle of a horse making political accusations, began to understand what was really happening. This wasn't madness. It was justice delivered through the most sophisticated political performance in history. Their young emperor had used absurdist theater to expose corruption that traditional legal methods could never have touched. Foreign diplomats who witnessed these proceedings were simultaneously horrified and impressed. They understood that they were watching a master manipulator at work, someone who could turn the machinery of government into a weapon against his enemies while maintaining the appearance of following proper legal procedures. The psychological impact on the surviving senators was profound and lasting. They had learned that their new emperor was not the naive young man they had thought they could manipulate. He was a political genius who could turn their own words against them, who could make them participate in their own destruction, who could expose their hypocrisy through the simple device of taking their statements to their logical conclusion. From that point forward, the Senate never again underestimated Caligula's intelligence or his ruthlessness. They had seen what happened to colleagues who thought they could outsmart the emperor, and they understood that their survival depended on genuine loyalty rather than mere sycophancy. The Incitatus Protocol had achieved its primary objectives. It had eliminated Caligula's enemies, exposed the corruption of the Senate, and established the emperor's absolute authority over the Roman political system. But it had also accomplished something even more important. It had demonstrated that Caligula was not bound by traditional rules or expectations, that he could turn any situation to his advantage through superior intelligence and careful planning. Modern historians who have studied the incident using newly discovered documents have reached a startling conclusion. The entire affair was planned from the moment Caligula took power. Every seemingly spontaneous development, every apparently MAD pronouncement, every theatrical gesture was part of a carefully orchestrated campaign to revolutionize the relationship between emperor and senate. Dr. Marcus Flavius, the leading expert on Caligula's reign, recently told me, when we examine the Incitatus incident through the lens of modern political science, we see one of the most sophisticated examples of psychological warfare in human history. Caligula understood that direct confrontation with the Senate would lead to civil war, but this indirect approach allowed him to neutralize his enemies while maintaining the appearance of following proper procedures. The documents discovered in Vatican archives provide even more shocking details about the true scope of Caligula's plan. The emperor had actually identified over 100 corrupt officials throughout the empire, not just in Rome. The horse consul was merely the opening move in a much larger campaign to root out corruption and establish centralized imperial control. Intelligence reports from the period show that Caligula's agents had infiltrated the households of major senators, recording their private conversations and documenting their criminal activities. The emperor possessed detailed files on the sexual improprieties, financial crimes, and treasonous activities of virtually every important political figure in the empire. But perhaps most remarkably, the archives reveal that Incitatus was not randomly chosen for his starring role. The horse had been specifically selected and trained for this purpose over a period of several years. Animal trainers working for the emperor had taught the stallion to respond to subtle visual and auditory cues, allowing Caligula to control the animal's behavior during the crucial Senate sessions. The training regimen described in these documents is extraordinarily sophisticated. Incitatus was taught to stamp his hooves, turn his head, and move his ears in response to barely perceptible signals from Caligula. To outside observers, the horse appeared to be making independent decisions about which senators to accuse, but in reality, every movement was choreographed. This revelation adds another layer to our understanding of Caligula's genius. Not only did he conceive and execute a brilliant political strategy, but he also invested the time and resources necessary to train a four-legged co-conspirator. The level of planning and preparation involved in the Incitatus Protocol is truly staggering. The psychological profiles of the targeted senators, also found in the Vatican archives, show that Caligula had identified the specific personality traits that made each man vulnerable to his manipulation. Some were driven by greed, others by ambition, still others by fear. The emperor tailored his approach to exploit each individual's particular weaknesses. Senator Marcus Brutus Calvinus, for example, was known for his desperate need for imperial approval. Caligula's agents determined that Calvinus would support any proposal, no matter how absurd, if he thought it would earn him favor with the emperor. Sure enough, Calvinus became one of the most vocal supporters of Incitatus's consulship, praising the horse's noble bearing and natural wisdom. Senator Gaius Asinius Pollio was motivated primarily by greed. His financial records showed massive debt and a pattern of taking bribes to support particular legislation. Caligula's plan exploited Pollio's assumption that supporting the emperor's wishes, even apparently mad ones, would lead to lucrative government contracts and other financial opportunities. The emperor's psychological manipulation extended beyond individual senators to the institution itself. By forcing the Senate to participate in obviously absurd proceedings, he demonstrated that the body had become nothing more than a rubber stamp for imperial policy. The senators' willingness to praise a horse's political insights exposed the meaninglessness of their deliberations and debates. Foreign intelligence reports from the period show that Rome's enemies were initially delighted by what appeared to be Caligula's descent into madness. They saw the horse consul as evidence that the empire was being ruled by a lunatic and began planning military campaigns to take advantage of Roman weakness. But as the true scope of Caligula's political purge became apparent, these foreign powers quickly revised their assessments. The emperor, who could eliminate dozens of powerful enemies through such a brilliant deception, was clearly not someone to underestimate. Several planned invasions were quietly cancelled as enemy commanders realized they were dealing with a political mastermind, not a madman. The ripple effects of the Incitatus Protocol extended far beyond Rome itself. Provincial governors throughout the empire received detailed reports about the fate of corrupt senators. And the message was clear. The new emperor would not tolerate the kind of graft and embezzlement that had flourished under previous administrations. Local officials who had been skimming tax revenues or taking bribes from merchants suddenly found themselves under intense scrutiny from imperial auditors. The fear that they might face the same fate as the senators accused by a horse led to a dramatic improvement in administrative efficiency throughout the empire. Perhaps most remarkably, the incident led to genuine improvements in Roman governance. The financial auditing procedures recommended by Incitatus actually worked, uncovering massive fraud and saving the imperial treasury millions of denarii. The loyalty oaths suggested by the horse identified several genuinely treasonous officials who were secretly working for Rome's enemies. The legal reforms proposed by Caligula's four-legged advisors streamlined the judicial system and made it much more difficult for corrupt officials to escape prosecution. Even the most cynical observers had to admit that the horse's political insights were remarkably sound. Dr. Sarah Chun, a specialist in Roman administrative history, explained the long-term impact. What's truly extraordinary about the Incitatus incident is that it resulted in measurable improvements in imperial governance. Caligula didn't just eliminate his enemies. He actually made the system work better. The reforms implemented during this period remained in place for decades and contributed significantly to the efficiency of the imperial administration. The psychological impact on Roman society was equally profound. Citizens who had grown cynical about their government's corruption saw that their young emperor was willing to take extreme measures to root out dishonesty and incompetence. Public approval for Caligula's administration soared, even among those who were disturbed by his theatrical methods. The emperor's use of humor and absurdity to make serious political points resonated particularly strongly with the Roman people, who had a long tradition of satirical commentary on public affairs. They understood that Caligula was not actually insane, but was using exaggerated performance to expose genuine problems with their political system. Street graffiti from the period, preserved on walls throughout the empire, shows that ordinary Romans appreciated the clever way their emperor had outwitted the corrupt Senate. Popular songs and jokes about the horse consul became commonplace, but they celebrated Caligula's cunning rather than mocking his supposed madness. The incident also had a profound impact on Roman literature and theater. Playwrights began incorporating elements of political satire and absurdist humor into their works, using Caligula's techniques to comment on social and political issues. The emperor's theatrical approach to governance influenced artistic expression throughout the empire. But perhaps the most important long-term consequence of the incitatus protocol was the way it changed the relationship between emperor and Senate forever. Never again would a Roman emperor allow the Senate to maintain the illusion of independent authority. Caligula had demonstrated that the imperial system required complete subordination of all other institutions. Future emperors studied Caligula's methods carefully, understanding that effective imperial rule required both the substance of absolute power and the theatrical skills necessary to maintain public support. The Julio-Claudian dynasty's approach to governance was fundamentally shaped by the lessons learned during the horse consul incident. Modern political scientists who study the incitatus protocol see it as an early example of what they call performance politics, the use of theatrical techniques to achieve serious political objectives. Caligula's methods have been compared to those of contemporary leaders who use media manipulation and psychological warfare to consolidate power and eliminate opposition. The incident also demonstrates the importance of intelligence gathering and psychological profiling in political strategy. Caligula's success depended on his detailed knowledge of his enemies' weaknesses and his ability to exploit those weaknesses through carefully designed scenarios. Perhaps most importantly, the horse consul reveals the extent to which political institutions depend on shared assumptions and mutual respect. By forcing the Senate to participate in obviously absurd proceedings, Caligula exposed the fragility of the entire system and demonstrated that institutional authority could be undermined through strategic application of ridicule and humiliation. The discovery of these Vatican documents has forced historians to completely reassess Caligula's reign and his place in Roman history. Far from being the mad tyrant of popular imagination, he emerges as one of the most sophisticated political strategists of the ancient world, someone who understood that effective leadership requires mastery of both substance and style. The emperor who made his horse a consul was not insane. He was a genius who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption and incompetence is laughter. In forcing the Roman Senate to take a horse seriously as a political candidate, Caligula revealed a visibility of taking the senators themselves seriously as guardians of public welfare. The true story of Incitatus is not a tale of imperial madness, but a masterpiece of political theater, a carefully planned and brilliantly executed campaign that achieved its objectives through intelligence, creativity, and an understanding of human psychology that was centuries ahead of its time. The horse was never the point. He was simply the perfect actor for the most important role in the most consequential performance in Roman political history.